Good morning, welcome back to Football League World TV. It's Tuesday morning and it's time for the latest edition of the debate, and we're talking Charlton and whether they should give Johnnie Jackson the permanent job. Joining me is Football League World's resident Charlton Athletic fan, Marcus Ally. Marcus, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, George. Very privileged position I find myself in, I think, to be talking all things Charlton on a Tuesday morning. So looking forward to this one.
It's a perfect start to your day, I'm sure. Charlton fans, do get in touch. Let us know what you've made of Johnnie Jackson's start as caretaker boss in charge of the Valley. Should he be given the permanent job by Thomas Sandgaard? Let's get straight into it. The best place to start, Marcus, is probably just looking at it in a general sense. What have you made of Jackson's tenure in charge so far at Charlton? What do you think he's done to improve things compared to how it was going under Nigel Adkins?
Well, I think one of the main buzzwords coming from Jackson and the players has been clarity. And that was definitely something that wasn't happening under Nigel Adkins. And some of the ideas that he was trying to put across was shown on the pitch and has been shown in how the players have spoke about it afterwards. They just weren't really sure and felt like they had too much on their mind to really carry out on the pitch. So Jackson, it seems like, has kind of stripped it back to basics. He said he's tried to make the players enjoy training as much as they could. And he said when he took charge that he spoke to a few of the senior players, which I'd imagine would be the likes of Jason Pearce and Jaden Stockley, Alex Gilby. And that was the main feedback he got, that they just want more clarity, more enjoyment, and to know what they're doing, more simplicity in the ideas that he's trying to get across. And I think that has been clear in the performances that you've seen from the side and the tactics that he's been able to implement.
Do you think it's somewhat a little bit surprising that perhaps, it almost sounds like the players didn't have that conversation with Nigel Adkins, but it almost seems like they didn't tell him, look, we don't exactly know what you're asking us to do. It seems like such a simple thing for Jackson to change, but that appears to be the case.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the things that could cause maybe that breakdown is the lack of consistency in selection that there was under Nigel Adkins. It really was. I think remembering back to one period, there was 18 changes in 3 games. So how you're going to really build anything, particularly at the start of a season, when you're chopping and changing like that, is going to be extremely difficult. Yeah, I can't speak for what the atmosphere was like on the training ground, but for the senior players to not feel comfortable to go up to their manager and say, look, we're doing really poorly. We'd like to try something different. Yeah, I don't know. Clearly, there was some kind of breakdown in relations and trust within the squad and the manager. So, yeah, sometimes caretaker managers can maybe get more credit that they deserve it in that regard, as in just as being plain and simple and just trying to make the players enjoy training again and simplify the tactics. But that was the case. And with the results that Jackson has brought from it, he deserves a lot of credit.
I mean, it certainly looks like, he knows a pretty good idea of what his best team looks like, doesn't it? I mean, as you mentioned, compared to Atkins, it seemed like a new team every week, and there was occasional lineups that got announced, and it kind of left you sort of scratching your head, thinking, well, what's the selection here then? It seems like Jackson's kind of got a very good idea of his best 11.
Yeah, absolutely. Under Atkins, there was a 4-3-3, a 4-2-3-1, and briefly a 3-4-3 formation at the start of the season. Since Jackson's come in all 7 games, he likes to call it a 3-5-2. I think it's more of a 3-1-4-2 with George Dobson just sat in front of the back 3. And another buzzword, I think he's been able to create an identity. And he's sort of been bold enough to stick by these tactics. Obviously, it's easier when results are going well on the pitch, but it does feel like that's a system that he believes in, and he's been able to sort of mould that around the personnel that he has at his disposal as well. If you told me that a few weeks into Johnnie Jackson's reign that we'd have Dialang Jaisimi playing right wing back, Sean Clare at centre back, and Ben Purrington as a flying left winger in possession, I would have had a lot of concerns about Johnnie Jackson, but he's made it work. And it's something that he clearly believes in. It's something all the players are buying into, which is definitely something that wasn't the case under Nigel Adkins. So I think sticking with the same formation and helping the players learn their own individual roles within that better, has definitely been a key area that he's been able to change and produce what's gone on in the last 7 games.
Yeah, I mean the upturn in performances from certain individuals has been pretty stark, hasn't it, as well, Marcus? I mean, you look at, I think particularly some of the new players that come in during the summer, and then it didn't seem to be working for them under Atkins. But you mentioned the likes of George Dobson and Sean Clare there for starters. Jalan Jaisemi obviously wasn't a new signing in the summer, but he's still relatively new to the club. He seems to be enjoying his time under Jackson more. Who have you been impressed with under Jackson's sort of tenure in the last 7 games? Who's really caught your eye?
Yeah, there's been a handful of names, and it's not like Adkins didn't have enough to choose from, hence why he was able to make so many changes. But George Dobson has to be a standout name. Bit peculiar case with him. He was so out of favour at Sunderland last season, ended up impressing on loan at Wimbledon, which probably brought the Charlton interest about. He was completely out of the matchday squad for the last 4 games under Nigel Adkins, which was really surprising because the nature of the performances that were being displayed, it did just seem like there was a lack of energy and a lack of work rate and just desire from the players, which was probably due to a little bit to that confusion. But one thing, if nothing else, that George Dobson does give to a team is a relentless work rate and great energy in the middle of the park, just fighting for every first and second ball. And the style that Johnnie Jackson tried to implement, he's been crucial to that. So as I said, from being out of the matchday squad for the last 4 match days of Nigel Adkins' reign, he's now played every minute of the 7 league games under Johnnie Jackson. He was thrown straight in at Sunderland, got a man of the match performance against his old club. Then Ben Purrington, of course, was out of favour to Papa Soare. And obviously Purrington's come in, scored 3 goals in 7 league games and also played every single minute of league action since Jackson came in. Then there's Dagless Jaisemi, was outside, not even on the bench in the last 6 league games. He came in as an enforced change because Jonathan Lecco got injured, but has really grabbed that opportunity. And then, as you mentioned, Sean Clare, a player who did see a little bit more action under Nigel Adkins, but it was more start, sort of 1 in every 3 games and coming off the bench sometimes. And he slotted into the back 3 really well, to be fair. It shows maturity of a player, I think, to learn a new role, and definitely speaks to how well Jackson is getting all the players to believe in what he's trying to get across. So those 4, I think, particularly stand out. But with the likes of Dobson and Jaisemi being literally frozen out of the side to come in and play the way they have, just shows a huge difference between the Adkins reign and Jackson's tenure so far.
I mean, I think, Dobson's a really good example of the changes Jackson's made, hasn't he? I mean, we kind of spoke at the top of the show that Jackson has simplified things more than anything else. And Dobson is a key example of, if you do the basics well, you're going to have an impact, particularly, at League One level.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an interview with Craig McGillivray, the goalkeeper, on the club's club media in the last week or so. And one of the things he said really stuck with me, that speaking about that simplicity and how Jackson has said to them, try and keep the ball on the deck. But if you can't do that, don't be afraid to go direct, and then we'll play off the second ball. When you've got someone like Jayden Stockley up top, that is a more accessible avenue, as in going more direct, but also the midfielders to play off the second ball, the likes of Elliot Lee, Alex Gilby and Dobson, with just their relentless energy, is really hard to play against when you've got that type of endeavour and just relentless energy really in the middle of the park. And not being ashamed of doing that is something that I think Nigel Adkins was possibly too conscious of at this level. Obviously, he ended up dropping Jayden Stockley purely because he didn't want the players to be playing too many hopeful long balls up, whereas Jackson's kind of said, look, we're going to have to mix it up at times, and this is how we're going to do it. So, yeah, George Dobson definitely embodies the whole idea and wholeheartedness that Jackson's really tried to instill in the team.
As we get to the halfway point in this debate, so let's look at some of the comments that come in from YouTube. Interestingly, from supporters away from Charlton, Fulham fan Wayne Warden getting in touch on YouTube. Hi guys, yes, Charlton should give Jackson the job, from a Fulham fan. And also Harry has got in touch on YouTube as well, a Sunderland fan. I'd be shocked if Charlton don't give Jackson the job. Sunderland fan here, by the way. And he continues, he seems to have a real connection with the fans, a lot more unity all round, which I think is, really, really obvious to see, isn't it, Marcus? do keep getting in touch as well. People watching, Charlton fans and fans of other clubs, do let us know what you think of the situation with Jackson at the Valley. But it's interesting, isn't it, Marcus, that not just Charlton fans are impressed with the work that Jackson's doing. It's fans from clubs both in the league and outside of League One too.
Absolutely. When you look at the run that we've been on, and despite the last week, the results as a collective in 7 games, 14 points, does command a lot of respect. When Adkins picked up 9 points in 13 league games at the start of the season, Johnnie Jackson picked up 10 in his first 4. So if that doesn't tell you that something very different has changed, there were 3 clean sheets in that as well. Then I don't know what will. I think Johnnie Jackson. I think it's a very romantic position, I think, to have a guy at the club who was a player for sort of 8 or 9 years, then has been the assistant manager for sort of 2 or 3 years, and has been constantly an integral figure at the club for all of that time, was a captain for large periods as well, to then have that to ascend into becoming the manager and then to have success as the manager. I feel it's kind of a dream scenario for any football fan. So to have that at Charlton is a huge opportunity. We don't know how it's going to go long term in terms of whether or not he gets the manager job. And even if he does, how much success he could have. 7 games is still too small of a sample size to start thinking about that. But it is definitely a very idealist scenario that could play out very, very nicely for Charlton fans.
Let's look at some of those results in a little bit more depth now, Marcus. Obviously, great results against the likes of Sunderland and Plymouth, beat them. A draw against Rotherham as well, which come the end of the season could prove to be important. 3 teams right in the playoff and promotion picture. But then you just look at the last 2 results as well. A draw against Morecambe, obviously 2-0 up there. Perhaps should have seen that game out, and then a loss at Shrewsbury as well late on. And Harry gets in touch. Well, I don't know if he's been reading our script beforehand, but getting in touch on YouTube again. Marcus, are you concerned with Charlton's last result in particular, a surprise defeat at Shrewsbury? So, Marcus, how do you assess it? Like I've mentioned, good results against some really good teams in the division, then a couple of slightly more dodgy results, I guess, against teams that you might have expected Charlton to do better against. They're probably slight blips. Johnnie Jackson would have had to lose a game eventually, I think it's fair to say. And it probably shouldn't really go against him too much, should it, in terms of him, getting this permanent job potentially.
Yeah, at the end of the day, he is learning on the job. I think maybe in hindsight, there's a possibility that he could think back and say, I could have rotated the squad a little bit more in these 2 matches. Particularly the Morecambe match, he only made just the one change. I think Chris Gunter slotting into the centre of the back 3 for Jason Pearce. There are other options to him, and I think letting that 2-goal lead slip was a little bit to do with the fatigue of the squad, because that Plymouth game, we made it look comfortable in terms of limiting their chances and a 2-0 scoreline, but it really was every player. The intensity of that game was insane, really, for League One level. So to then play virtually the same team against Morecambe and the sort of, it wasn't a capitulation. I think Charlton was still trying to push and win the game by the end of it, but to get pegged back the 2 goals, I think the fatigue was a factor definitely in that. With the Shrewsbury match, it was a really tough one. Extreme weather conditions, obviously 93rd minute winner for Shrewsbury is never nice. There was a hint of a foul in the build-up, but I was very encouraged that Jackson didn't want to use that as an excuse as well. It just shows how calm and collected he is, really, and was just sort of pointing at other areas where Charlton could have dealt with ball into the box rather than sort of throwing the focus on the referee and taking any blame away from him or his players, which I know some managers would definitely use as a tactic. I do think the losses of Jayden Stockley to suspension and Jason Pearce to a knee injury, particularly in these sort of less aesthetically pleasing matches like at Shrewsbury, who have had a very good home record this season, by the way, was very significant. Jason Pearce and Stockley are the kind of guys that you want in that battle where the ball spends a lot of time in the air, real leaders on the pitch, particularly Pearce, just marshalling that back line. So that went against him in that regard. But yeah, I'm not too concerned on the whole. I think it was unsustainable to think we're going to go unbeaten for the rest of the season or something. It's very frustrating to think now the gap to the playoffs is 11 points when had we won 2 winnable games at Morecambe and Shrewsbury, it would be just 6 points. But on the whole, I think he's right to point out that the collective and the 7 league games as a whole, and it has been very impressive nonetheless. I think the conditions made it very difficult at Shrewsbury, and not a lot has been made of the significant injuries that Jackson's had to deal with and been able to produce excellent results throughout this 7-game stretch.
I mean, I suppose in some ways, learning on the job, in some respects, can be a bad thing for a football manager, obviously. But then you look at perhaps Charlton's prospects this season, given their bad start, we're not going to write them off from making the playoffs because we know how League One works. Similarly, I think it's probably fair to say that they're probably not going to go down this year. Perhaps it's a good season for having a manager that is sort of learning the job and then look to build for next season.
Yeah, very, very good position to be in. Charlton were 4 points adrift inside the relegation zone when Nigel Adkins was sacked. Now we're 6 points above the trapdoor. So that is a very good position to be in, sort of a 10-point leap on the other teams around you in just 7 games. The expectations are also very low for a rookie manager because the standards were set so low. So personally, I think Jackson could finish in mid-table with Charlton, and it's because of the initial fear of a possible first ever relegation to the 4th tier. It'd be seen to be doing a good job. I think we won't be in a point to assess how good a job that is until further on from now. But yeah, it is a nice situation to have a rookie manager. He's obviously a guy that would like the job on a permanent, so there's that carrot for Sandgaard to have a look and see how he gets on. And potentially we will see a shorter contract go to him, maybe until the end of the season or end of next season, in terms of just seeing out this transition, which probably is the rest of this season. If Charlton can finish in mid-table and have a deep run in maybe the FA Cup, some money spinning ties, or a deep run in the EFL Trophy, which are in action in tonight, then I think that would sort of qualify as a successful season given the position that we were in.
Okay, let's go to a couple more comments coming in from YouTube. Soren's got in touch from Kurdistan. Jacko's the perfect fit to manage the Charlton team. I hope he'll get the job as soon as possible. And EFL Lover makes an interesting point on YouTube, which kind of brings us to the last point of discussion, really, before we kind of wrap this show up, Marcus. He's seen Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank was linked. What do you think of that one? And just in general, Marcus, if Thomas Sandgaard decides that Johnnie Jackson isn't the man for Charlton, does he risk alienating a fair amount of the Charlton support, particularly if he gets it wrong? And in saying that, if he does go ahead and bring someone else in, who would you like to see to possibly replace Jackson?
Yeah, so first of all, on Jimmy Floyd, I'm not convinced at all by his managerial record. I think outside of Burton at QPR, he didn't last very long. At Northampton Town, more or less relegated the club. So I think outside of Burton, he's still got a lot to prove in management. And I don't think that next opportunity should be at Charlton in the short term. If there was any man to stand out that isn't Johnnie Jackson for me, I'd go back to what I said straight after Nigel Adkins was sacked. And I think Michael Flynn is probably the most intriguing name that I'd like to see possibly given the job, with the condition that it's definitely not Johnnie Jackson. Coming to Sandgaard, if Jackson doesn't get the job, he would completely lose the fan base, I think, to be honest. I'm not going so far. I'm not saying there'd be protests or anything like that, but there'd be a significant drop in attendances. There's just so much goodwill behind the feeling and the wave of optimism at the club at the moment. And Charlton fans already have a lot of suspicion towards new owners, which Thomas Sandgaard, even though he's been there over a year now, would still probably class as quite a new owner in the Football League. There is a lot of suspicion around them because of what's gone in the past with Roland and East Street Investments. So Sandgaard doesn't really have enough credit in the bank to then make a very unpopular decision like this and keep the fan base on side. As I said, I don't think there'd be any sort of cause for his head or anything like that. Charlton fans are very thankful because we might not have a club anymore if it wasn't for Thomas Sandgaard. So But in that regard, he would lose a lot of the support from the crowd, which has been brought about by Johnnie Jackson, a Charlton man in the dugout and having such success. So it is an important decision for him to make. I completely respect that he's taken his time over it. I would have given Jackson the job by now until the end of the season, but I do understand how Sandgaard made a mistake appointing Nigel Adkins very quickly, and doesn't want to do the same thing with Johnnie Jackson. I completely understand that. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting next few weeks to monitor. I mean, I'd imagine he'll make a decision in the next few weeks, one way or another. But yeah, I do think there'd be a large portion of the fan base that would not support the club as vocally and with their feet at the Valley should Jackson not get the job on a full-time basis.
I mean, in some respects, Jimmy Floyd-Hasselbaink might be better off, obviously, staying at Burton, but also being a referee between Jamie Carragher and Roy Keane on Super Sunday on Sky Sports after what happened following the game between Chelsea and Man United. Just before we go then, Marcus, time to get your conclusion. We'll just get Wayne's thoughts again, getting in touch on YouTube. Charlton must keep Jackson. He will take Charlton up next season, which I'm sure plenty of Addicts fans would use this season as a building block. I'm assuming, Marcus, you're very much Jackson in camp, and you want to see him get the permanent job sooner rather than later.
Yeah, 100%. I'd say my real deciding moment was after that Plymouth performance and victory. Argyle were top of the league, and I think, to be honest, Plymouth, Sunderland, and Rotherham all played well against Charlton, but just weren't able to take the points out of the game that they would have liked to. With Jackson, I'd like to see him get it. Initially, I said until the end of the season. Maybe I'd extend that to the end of next season. I don't want any sort of long-term contracts. I think you put yourself in a position where you could get into a tricky situation if a new manager and new manager in his first job sort of doesn't live up to expectations. So I don't want to go overboard. I'd be happy if he was to get it to the end of the season or the end of next season. I don't think we need to go too far. But I think he's done enough that even if he didn't get the job, there could be other League One clubs trying to appoint Johnnie Jackson as their manager. That's just how well he's done. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I'd be giving it to him until the end of the season today if it was my decision. But if it was until the end of next season as well, I'd be content with that as well.
Okay, yeah, no, for what it's worth, I also agree. I think Johnnie Jackson, I think he should have been permanently appointed by now anyway, but hopefully, it's just a case of when and not if he gets the job. For Charlton fans, they'll be well behind that appointment, I'm sure. Just finally, one final comment, Helen on YouTube as well, CAFC must appoint JJ, simple as that. I think that's a good way to wrap up the debate this morning even, not this afternoon, this morning. Getting a little ahead of myself there with the rest of the day, but we can talk about that now. What's coming up on Football League World TV at 11 o'clock, so we better get off here sooner rather than later. We've got the League One Fan Awards nominations. Ned Holmes will be revealing who the Football League World picks for November are. He's joined by Chris Thorpe. Then at 2 p.m, we've got another debate, plenty coming at you. This Tuesday, Blackburn Rovers related. Ben Brereton Diaz, is he good enough for the Premier League? He's been in brilliant form, of course, this season so far. The Ewood Park Club in the Championship. Marcus, thanks for joining me this morning. Been really interesting to get your thoughts on Johnnie Jackson. Hopefully, you'll get some good news in the Charlton manager respect sooner rather than later. And everyone that joined in the comments, that was really good as well. Thanks for sending them in. Do continue to do so in future shows on Football League World TV. Just before we go, it's going to be bye from us, but do keep following Football League World TV. Do subscribe to it on YouTube and do like this video as well if you get the chance. It'd be greatly appreciated. But we'll speak to you very soon.